And I was going to ask you to think about how are you feeling right now in this moment. Take a moment to reflect on that. And once you've decided how you feel right now, think about how that might make you want to move. For example, maybe you're sitting the way you're sitting because of how you're feeling right now, or you might just want to get up and move a certain way because of your current emotional state. Is going to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to pull up the pictures? Okay.
Amy, Casey, and Emily are currently moving like one of these three emotions up here. Can you tell which emotion Emily here is moving like? Angry, right.
There you go. So at the exercise we just did, you can see how your psychological state affects your emotions. Your psychological state affects your movement. This picture really captures how I feel during finals exam week. I feel cooped up, bogged down with all the work. And what really helps for me to do is to, take a break, go for a walk, or even stretch a little. And that's kind of an example of how, movement can change your psychological state. So the idea that both psychological state and movement affect each other and are linked with each other is the idea behind our project. So the name of our project is Adapted Creative Movement for Children with Physical, Intellectual, and Developmental Disabilities. And the reason we chose to work with children with disabilities is because they're often unable to participate in community activities because it's difficult for them to keep up with peers who are developing typically. So by community activities, we mean things like local dance classes at, Miss Patty's or something. Our community partner, Anna King, who is joining us today, is a recreational therapist at Kluge Children's Rehabilitation Center, which is down on Ivy Street. It's part of the UVA health system. She teaches adapted dance classes for kids with any kind of disability. And usually her classes consist of teaching these kids a dance routine, and sometimes she'll have a creative movement exercise. While we were volunteering and observing, we noticed that some of the movements some kids weren't able to do because they were wheelchair bound or they had problems moving their arms. So we thought that creative movement would be a really good solution because it would allow the kids to move however they wanted to and however they could. So it would really reinforce what they could do rather than what they couldn't do. So the way our class is structured, we always started off with a beach ball name game so everybody could break the ice and get to know each other. And we followed that with a free dance exercise. So what you saw us doing in the beginning was in fact an exercise that we did during one of the classes. We followed that up with some stretching, and then sometimes we would teach them different skills. Like one class period, we taught them the 5 positions in ballet. We then did some exercises taken from this book, Creative Dance for All Ages by Anne Green Gilbert, and her exercises were separated into categories. Like one day we would focus on body parts, one day we would focus on locomotor skills. So we would do a couple of exercises taken from this book. And then we would finish off class with a dance routine that we accumulated over the course of the 5 classes. And I forgot to mention, with the exercises, we always made an effort to have at least one exercise where we asked the kids to partner up with each other and interact with each other.
So Laban movement analysis is a tool used to describe people's movement and oftentimes is linked with emotion or social relationships. We used it in our project as a way to monitor how the participants' movement changed over time and if that had any relationship to their social behavior. So if you think back to the dances that we were doing earlier, what made you think that Casey was happy or I was sad? That's what we were. In LMA terms, you might say that Casey had a very free-flowing feel, and I had a very small kinesphere. And these are things that might shape how you think that we are emotionally. We had a 74-item survey that they filled out that described different elements of LMA. We found that 5 had statistically significant inter-rater reliability, which means that they were basically consistent, the 2 analysts, in how they were scoring people. So these 5, one is upper-lower connectivity, and this has to do with homologous movement in the upper and lower, grounding and yielding and pushing into the lower, and reaching and pulling in the upper. And you see these patterns pretty much in everyday life. Relationship of self to self is just an awareness of self as opposed to reaching out or communicating with others. Shape flow is how your internal body would change shape just how it wants to, not for a purpose, but maybe just adjusting to get comfortable, scratching your nose, things like that. Flow is described as continuity of movement. It's a continuum between free and bound. Bound is very contained movement, and free flow is an outpouring. Kinesphere is always talked about as your personal bubble. So it's either the place that you can reach around you or just how small or big you feel that your personal space is.
So we attempted to relate the lab on movement analysis data with data from the social responsiveness scale, which is a scale that the parents would fill out to measure the social impairment of the children enrolled in the class. This scale has 5 different subscales, in addition to a total score that measures the severity of social deficits. The 5 treatment subscales are social motivation, social awareness, social cognition, autistic mannerisms, and social communication, which assess the receptive, cognitive, expressive, and motivational aspects of social behavior, as well as autistic preoccupations of a child. And the brevity of this measure made it useful for us because the parents could fill it out quickly at the beginning and at the end of our intervention.
So Amy talked a little bit about the dance side of the project, and Casey talked a little bit about the social skills side. To kind of give you guys an idea of how they overlap, here's a picture of 3 ladies sitting on a bench, and there's some pretty obvious cues that they know each other. One of which is that the kinesphere of both these ladies is overlapping. They're very close to each other. Another is that one, is talking to the other, and that's an example of social communication. On the other hand, you might have some bench strangers and 2 kids sitting on opposite ends of the bench, and you'll see that the kinespheres don't overlap. They're very far apart, and you'll also see that there's a lack of social motivation because neither's going up to the other to start a conversation.
With our social responsiveness survey data, we found that some children improved in their social functioning while others regressed. We ran descriptive statistics on the LMA data, the lab on movement analysis data, and found that with those 5 reliable elements, there were no apparent ceiling or floor effects, and the elements had good central tendency and good distribution, which means our lab analysts used the full range of the scale. They weren't all rating everyone at a 3 or a 4 on any movement. After running a statistical analysis called an ANOVA based on participants, we found that for all of our constructs, with the exception of upper-lower, there were significant differences between participants, which means that our raters did not give the same scores for each student, and there were individual differences in the movement patterns that the lab analysis was sensitive to.
When we ran an ANOVA by exercise, we found that there was no significant difference, which is actually a good thing, because that means that regardless of where the exercise is placed within the class, we are rating what was happening with the children. We also found when we ran an ANOVA by week by participant that, as you can see, all of the individual participants had isolated effects, which means that with a larger sample size over a larger amount of time, we would likely see some significant and meaningful differences at the individual level. As you can see, there's a spike in the green line here, and that was consistent over all of our estimated marginal mean graphs, which means that that exercise at the top of that graph would be pretty good for Anna to do again in the future. Cronbach's alpha is a measure that allows us to see how good all of our measures would be together as a scale, and a good alpha is 0.7 and ours is 0.845, which means it would be really good in the future as a scale together.
So next I'd like to talk a little bit about the benefits, and I'll start off with the ones to the participants. We saw that for one of them, holding a prop seemed to help him connect to his distal edges or be more aware of the surrounding space. For another child, we saw that she can reach to a full or large kinesphere and did so when the movement called for it, but she tended to return to her smaller kinesphere size. And this is a really important observation because it showed that even though this child was only comfortable normally in her smaller kinesphere size, the fact that she moved out into a larger one suggests that she was able to explore and move in a different way than what she was used to. We also found that one student was highly invested in the activity and demonstrated clear attention and focus was important since a lot of the children had trouble following the exercises and listening to directions. And we also saw that one child seemed really engaged visually with others in the space. Even though our data didn't show a clear association between participation in the class or improvement in social skills, this was encouraging because it showed that perhaps this child had developed more social awareness skills. So thanks, guys.